It's 2020 and currently the world is experiencing a crisis like never seen before. The coronavirus has rapidly spread across the globe, collapsing industries, hospitalising thousands of people and resulting in many fatalities. It is now that we've decided to start the Skadi podcast to help those in the financial services navigate this very uncertain future. In this week's episode, we talk to Robert Brooker, Head of Fraud and Forensics at PKF Littlejohn, and also the chair of the London Fraud Forum. If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends.
So welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Nick, very much for inviting me. Looking forward to it.
Good. So, Rob, I mean, the reason why one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is that you have, great knowledge of procurement fraud, particularly earlier in your career, working, I think, for Transport for London or London Transport. There has been a lot of headlines in the press about PPE, personal protective equipment. And obviously the race for countries across the world, governments to gather in PPE. And it just seems to me an area that's ripe for fraud. I'm not suggesting that the recent headlines around the shipment that the UK sent the RAF to collect from Turkey had anything fraudulent going on about it. But certainly it seems an area where, with the pressure that people are under, that some of the controls may be relaxed at this critical time. What are your thoughts on that?
Nick, thank you very much. Couldn't agree more. I'm a bit of a procurement fraud kind of my area, and you're quite right. I spent 10 years at Transport for London as head of fraud, and as you can imagine, a £13 billion organisation with the majority of servicing goods that they're buying in. So fraud has always been in my blood for 25 years now. And procurement has been in my blood for certainly those 10 and if not longer. The problem we've got is, generally speaking, is ultimately a crisis brings on needs and requirements. So here we are in a situation whereby people are trying to lay their hands on PPE. And whether that be masks, whether that be gloves, ventilators, whatever it might be, everybody is jumping on the bandwagon. There's a quick buck to be made here. And unfortunately, for all of us that are procuring, the moment there's a quick buck to be made, the sharks are hovering. And the minute the sharks are hovering, not just in the UK, obviously you refer to Turkey, we all know the Chinese as well. Turkey and China are the largest producers of PPE. But unfortunately, the middlemen in this country trying to obtain that PPE aren't necessarily the right people. They're not right distributors. They're not going through the right processes to actually create it. So what you have is a two-way kind of scenario. Is that you've got the trusts in the hospitals, for instance, private organisations, even Transport for London coming out just yesterday and saying that everyone's going to have to wear a face mask of some description whilst travelling on their transport. So there they are, needing to get hold of PPE quickly. What happens? We go to people that aren't on our supply chain. We don't know people necessarily on our supply chain who provide PPE. That's the other issue. Everybody now is a PPE supplier, aren't they? It doesn't matter what field you're in, everybody's in it. To the extent I know of a company who produce glass up here in the northwest where I live. And actually, they're, because of a large client base of theirs, is the hospitality sector. And clearly, they're going to require PPE when they return to work. So I know they've been sourcing in excess of 5 million pieces of PPE from throughout the world. The problem you've got initially is ensuring what actually is the documentation around the garments they have. Is it genuine? Are the garments worth anything on paper? What do they look like? So basically, they're dealing with people they've never dealt with. So from a procurement perspective, we go back to some very basics that we all use here, is know your customer, know your supply chain. What due diligence has been taken out on these people? How about internally, when we are making purchases, do we have the right people in the right jobs now? We've all gone through furloughed. Great to see it resurrected today for another 4 months. I think that would be excellent for the economy. But actually, do we have the right people to approve the invoice? Do we have the right people to approve the actual purchase in the first place? We haven't gone through a tender process to obtain this stuff. It's cash buying, I believe. People are literally paying upfront cash to get these goods in return for what might be, unfortunately, either no goods at all or goods that just aren't worth the paper they're written on. They could be completely counterfeit and serve no purpose. You and I would be better with a piece of A4.
So it really is a perfect storm, if you like. You have this sudden rush, this sudden need, where people are going out for products that they don't know, and that brings them into an unknown or new supply chain. And I think the furlough point is an absolutely fascinating issue, because as you rightly say, and also, you know, trying to predict the cycle of how this has developed, and the fact that, you know, as you say, the UK is going attempting to go back to work on Wednesday, the 13th of May, and there are going to be a lot of businesses that now need PPE, and certainly those people that were perhaps in that role procuring for organisations may have been put out to furlough, and we know that it's a 3-week period they can't work for, and so it's be difficult to bring them back, and you may well cover with that particular with another particular person from the organisation. It does sound like a perfect storm.
And Nick, I totally agree with you. I think half the problem here is some of these purchases, obviously people have been trying to get their hands on PPE for a number of weeks now. You alluded to the fact we've been trying from Turkey as UK government, and we couldn't get it immediately. People have been trying to get it, and unfortunately I'm not sure we'll actually realise the impact of the potential fraud until people do return to work from tomorrow, or even thereafter in the weeks coming, whereby they then realise actually, where are our goods? Do we have the correct volume? Do we have the correct certification with those goods? Are they actually genuine articles? And how about the process? What went on while we were all sitting at home working? Yes, sitting at home working's worked, hasn't it? It's kept UK going. Let's be honest about it. We don't need the big plush offices at the moment. We're all sitting wherever we might be, not only in the UK, but abroad too. That's working. It all looks fine. But actually, we've got the furlough issue. We've got people potentially being made redundant. What do we have in terms of approval processes? What do we have in terms of schemes of delegation? Do we have the right people approving the right amount and volume of goods that are being purchased? And what does the accounts department look like? Are we taking any notice of the invoice that's received? Is it all online? Are we getting invoices at all? Are we just paying up front? We don't actually know the due diligence here. What are we doing? Who are we dealing with? What worries me is the further down the chain, who are these companies and what are we actually potentially, what is that money going towards, i.e. the worst case scenario, counter-terrorism activity, etc. Unfortunately, the crisis will always bring that on, but I'd like to think we could be a little bit tighter with it and make sure our controls are in place. Unfortunately, we haven't got the time to do that.
And what do you tend to see when you're looking at organisations, and obviously I'm sure you're dealing with organisations that are, you know, very different in scale, in terms of that sign-off and that procurement process? You know, what is the depth in terms of the people that are looking after that? You know, are there, you know, sign-offs that may be there for convenience, you know, to help out, that may not necessarily have the expertise in place, for example? I mean, what sort of things do you see in the sign-off process?
This is it. In a normal circumstance, you would like to think you'd have somebody actually buying, separate from anybody making payment. So we'd have somebody buying the goods who would have the knowledge. There would be a specification around what you require. You would ensure that the goods match that specification in accordance with UK law, generally speaking, making sure they reach ISO, whatever the requirement might be. Actually, what are we doing now? None of that, probably. What we would like to see, somebody makes the purchase, somebody who goes through a tender process, be it 3 quotes, be it an official tender document. Following that, we get based upon technical capability and price, and then somebody can hold that tender, whether it's 3 quotes or a full process, make sure that we've got the right information, make sure that we've got the right goods that are being offered to us, and then we can make the purchase. Accounts then, obviously, a account would be set up, accounts would pay the right people, you would use a SAP or an Oracle, you'd have an approval process within there, and it certainly wouldn't be cash up front, let's be honest.
I mean, it is fascinating, because really, I think what you're saying as a general theme is that time is really the enemy of fraud. And actually we have this situation where you know, we can't spend time because we have or certainly we had a situation that was developing so rapidly and so uncertainty that really any time that was spent was very, very adverse in terms of controlling, you know, this calamity that was enveloping the world. So it is quite an interesting juxtaposition that really, you know, when we think about processes and control process, people need time to scrutinize, to check, to do their due diligence. And this is really, you know, a very, very different environment for that to happen. Very, very challenging, I think, for control functions at this time.
Totally agree. I mean, time is always of the essence with procurement anyway. Believe it or not, we all in normal business as usual circumstances, we normally have a 2 or a 3 year contract with somebody. We get to the last minute, realise the contract's expiring, and we put in what's known as single source justification because I've run out of time. So we end up with this situation whereby people are saying they're the only company that can do that work for us. We want to use them. Well, actually, guys, from a procurement perspective and from a fraud perspective, scrutiny and overview, you've had 3 years. You know the tender's coming up, but just single source justification very often is time eluded. So here we are in exactly the same boats whereby we've got this time element, and time causes panic, not only from our side, from purchasers, but also from producing it from those poor people on the ground that are requiring the PPE. You can imagine, we've all seen the unions and everything that are involved in this at the moment, particularly in the rail industry, saying they're not happy for their staff to return. The National Union of Teachers obviously speaking out about teachers returning potentially in 2 or 3 weeks' time. And this is all around social distancing, which in line leads up to the PPE situation. So we have this thing where time is of the essence. People don't realise it. But what does that mean? The fraudsters know you are at time as well. And they jump on this situation. This is literally a situation to them. We have our own red flags. We have our own kind of organisation development plans and how we should deal with fraud. Don't be disillusioned. These organised crime gangs have also got their own strategic view on this. They're working like mad. Where can we get in for this at the moment? What's the latest development from government? What's needed? So in the last 24, 48 hours, we've seen that need for PPE completely ramp up, even though it was still absolutely at the top of everyone's agenda. It's now ramped up even more, and the fraudsters will be on this now. They'll be trying to make them in sweat houses all around the world, making PPE of some description to feed out and feed that we're going to buy without undertaking, as you alluded to, Nick, any due diligence whatsoever, because we need to keep people PPE and covered and protect ourselves. And unfortunately, it's a false economy. We think we're getting a deal, we think we're getting it. PPE is going up by the day at the moment as we speak. I believe that it's completely just increasing, and it had done up to now anyway. And then today, I believe PPE has gone through the roof in light of the announcements yesterday.
And also, I guess, you know, what is also another, you know, challenge for everybody is that when you broaden that potential customer base or that demand, the sophistication and knowledge of that customer base has to again decrease as well, because suddenly there's a whole load of new entrants coming into a field where, you know, obviously there's been the expertise of the people in the NHS and so on and so forth that are used to buying this type of equipment. But if you are, you know, a school's trust, for example, that needs this for your cleaners, if you're the entertainment business that you mentioned, what experience can they have had of PPE? Now, obviously, everyone is becoming a working from home, you know, expert, and I guess a PPE expert at a rate of knots. But it is an interesting situation that really there's almost a sort of, you know, cataclysmic amount of fuel being thrown towards the fraudsters at this point. It's very, very challenging.
There is, and you and I know, go back to Cressy Triangle, the opportunity, etc. Here are the fraudsters on the other side of the coin, knowing full well that people are making these purchases without knowing exactly what they're buying or why. So we have both sides of that fence, whereby we have people producing it genuinely sometimes, and they are producing it genuinely, but it's not their expertise. They've seen the niche in the market for their industry. They're not making money in any other way. Let's be honest, we'll all see in a short while of time the Burberry face masks completely being worn through North London. Sorry, Nina, being worn through North London, and people will be using them for other reasons to commit crime, etc. But the truth of that is, outside of the fence, trying to buy legitimately, we don't have the expertise and knowledge. Those producing and manufacturing the PPE certainly don't have the expertise and knowledge, and they're jumping on this and creating a complete vacuum of uncertainty. And unfortunately, people are going to become victims of this fraud, but they won't realise it for some time to come, I don't think.
I mean, this must be the largest situation, possibly outside of wartime, I suppose, when you've had a kind of mass procurement and probably never been so concentrated into one area or one particular set of product suite, if you like. I can only think of, natural disasters that might have a similar effect where you need reconstruction rapidly, and due to the nature of the disaster, your own manufacturing base might have been destroyed or hampered, for example. But it certainly is a unique situation. Looking outside of and away from PPE and procurement, and obviously the way that people are working now, what are some of your concerns about the work from home model, if you have any, or what do you think? Do you think this is a positive new paradigm? But I think mainly from the fraud perspective.
No, of course. I think there's two sides of that coin, isn't there? Let's be honest, the working from home, I think it's a completely different world we're going to see when we all return to whatever normality might be. Nick, I've got to be honest, from working perspective, I think people have become quite used to working at home. I think businesses are realising that there's a lot to be had from working from home, in terms of overhead costings, in terms of staff well-being, and etc. I think there's a lot of positives around it. Being the negative guy and the cynic that I am, having worked in fraud for so long, unfortunately, there are some issues around it that need to be managed, and hopefully we'll learn through these last couple of months, and we're still learning now. One is around, obviously, we talked about it earlier on amongst ourselves, but one's internet, and how secure are people's internet? How secure is it? Are we convinced that actually we're not going to be kind of bamboozled by those fraudsters that are trying to hack our own personal accounts? How secure are we working? The other is obviously things like Zoom and other like meeting hang-ups, for instance, or Teams. We've all read the stories in the press. People are being what they could Zoom bombed by pornographic images and what have you now. And unfortunately, that's ensuring you get your security in place. In the same way, we've got to ensure we've got firewalls on our own systems, and that people have got the right firewalls on their own personal laptops, etc., working at home. So there's an area that I think is really open for fraudulent activity from a cyber perspective, is making sure that we've got the right equipment to work with. The equipment is secure, and also the actual internet connection and everything can't be hacked along the way. So that's actually the purpose of working at home and why people are doing it. Thereafter, I think from an accounts perspective, there's concerns. We talked briefly a moment ago around accounts and the fact of approval processes. How do they work? We all have, whether it be Sage, whether it be Oracle, whether it be SAP, we've all got these systems that we're working within. Are the same controls in place from home? They should be, but actually the problem we've got at the moment is, are the same people in place in those roles? Are they working? Have they been furloughed? Have they been made redundant? Do they have the right levels of authority to be signing off some of these invoices and payments? Now, obviously, through that, you also got the mandate fraud, i.e. sometimes known as bank diversion fraud. And that is whereby you receive notification from a company who you deal with, normally your top 10 suppliers. And what you will receive is an email claiming to be from that supplier. Please note, we've changed our bank details from sort code ABC, account number ABC, and basically these are our new details. All future invoices, could you please pay to here? Now, this isn't a new phenomenon, unfortunately. Bank mandate fraud's been going on for a long time. I remember back in the day in TfL, we received letters from our set suppliers notifying us of a change of bank detail. How that's changed and developed with technology, excuse me, is basically not only are they now receiving an email, they're now hacking the whole system, whereby it looks like it's come from your finance director, until you right-click on the email and realise it's a Gmail account, or it's another Aon account or whatever. It's not actually the account you would expect it to be. Now, there are some things around that for which we can spot these. from a preventative point of view, what should we be doing? Generally speaking, you'll notice the language or the grammar in these emails isn't what you would expect from your director of finance or from your chief exec saying, could you please pay this now? Or even for the change of bank account details. It's not always perfect English or perfect grammar. So I think it's important to make sure that we're reading these emails correctly, right click on them to ensure where has it actually come from? Is it from a genuine source? But unfortunately, people are falling for it. And once again, similar to the PPE situation, the fraudsters are all over bank mandate fraud at the moment, sending out emails, jumping on people's accounts and basically hoodwinking that situation so that they can receive the money. The money is, generally speaking, goes into an account that's not kept in the UK, and normally the monies are wire transferred immediately to jurisdictions we have no control over. So there's that side of it. My other is, I've heard quite a lot of stories and read a lot in the press, particularly LinkedIn or other social media platforms, whereby people are working from home in terms of call centres. So I have concerns here around a call centre working at home around data. Now, there's two things here. You and I know if you was to be burgled, you wouldn't any longer look to see whether they've taken your TV or your VHS video recorder, so to speak, but we'd be looking for our identity documents. Do we have our passports? Do we have our insurance details? Do we have a utility bill? Or have they stolen them to claim a new identity? It's exactly the same with data. I have concerns, and there are organised gangs working in call centres now who are targeting call centres to harvest data from those people using these services. Look, we're in lockdown. Everyone was shopping online. Online shopping has gone through the roof, absolutely through the roof. It's one of the industries that's doing well through this situation, which is great to hear. At least there's some positivity for those that can't work in the retail industry. But what that means is the fraudsters are there. They're hovering once again around this. So what's happening is we've got call centres taking orders, taking payment. Now, just from orders, forget the actual payment element of it. You probably have to give your name, your address, an email, a telephone number. That data's harvest. If you add into that your bank account details, wow, what do we get now? They are now building a complete portfolio of details of people that are spending money online. Then what they're going to do, harvest that data and then farm that data within the dark web, ensuring that that goes to people who then use those details to make payments and unfortunately take money from people's accounts. And that is happening more and more as we speak because of the increase of online activity during the COVID-19 situation.
So really, what the situation has done is really, it's quite an enabler for insider risk, if you like.
Now, along with procurement, the insider threat is one of my complete red flags and concerns. You're quite right. There's two sides to this. One is, first of all, in the contact centre, in normal operations, you would have PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards, which prevents people from taking mobile phones into the call centre or pens or paper. We can't manage that and have no control over that in the home. So therefore, there's an enabler in the first place, is some of our controls have been dropped. The minute our controls are dropped, the guard is undone and the red flag should be waving because there are the concerns of fraud. And the enabler, as you rightly say, Nick, is literally for them to commit fraud online in the quickest possible way. Now, the enablers are always there. They're always going to be there. We accept that. We understand that. But it's what controls we have in place to prevent against those enablers. And I'm not convinced that we're all, as an economy at the moment, probably as stringent around the controls in place and recognising what their red flags might be and what the circumstances of dropping some of those controls could be.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think there's a certain amount of leeway. I mean, we've discussed this on previous Skadi podcasts that to just get the business continuity going in a situation such as this, there is some justification for relaxing some of the controls just to get business to continue. But it is so important to reinstate those as soon as there is some business stability, which I think is the phase that we are in now. This isn't actually a new way of working now to people. Everyone's got comfortable very, very quickly. Everyone's got up a very steep learning curve. And so I think it's certainly right that we are talking about, revisiting those controls now and making sure that they are robust and as in place as possible. I think you raised a very...
Sorry, it's interesting. How many people during the time of lockdown have realigned their fraud risk assessments? How many people have actually had a look to suggest that the impact and the likelihood of some of these events occurring has increased dramatically overnight? But actually, are we pinpointing that? What are we doing then? We have to, I agree with you, it is a risk assessment. We have to allow some of these controls to go to ensure that we can still trade and ensure that we're still making money as a business. We know that, we understand that. But actually, it is the likelihood and the impact and ensuring that actually we're not putting ourselves at unease risk as opposed to managing the situation versus actually we just open the doors and let everybody help themselves. And unfortunately, that is that risk analysis part that people, should be maintaining, not normally, probably on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis. I think almost at the moment, it's almost on a daily to weekly basis. You have to assess the risk because the risks are increasing time and time again. And then what we can do is we can perhaps add some risks, remove some risks, see how we go. You've got to play around with it, with the control mechanisms to ensure that it works. But the important thing to remember is what mitigations do we have in place and what is the impact if we let those go? Is the impact completely disastrous, or is it actually, we'll add that to our kind of like loss prevention kind of idea, in that we accept that we have a loss and we'll make a loss on certain things, but it's far outweighed by those positive transactions and the loss is minimal as opposed to it being larger than the actual gain.
And the other thing that you mentioned, which I find is a very interesting point, the point you make about the increase in bank account fraud and stepping in between payments. Almost the schemes that the government have put in place have really caused a cover for that kind of activity, because if you have a situation where there are only certain financial institutions that are providing things like the bounce back loans and so on and so forth, and you have to get that from your bank, then businesses are naturally going to be changing their bank details. So there is a lot of probably a higher number of new instructions, legitimate new instructions, flying around to mask some of those incorrect or fraudulent instructions, as you've mentioned. So it is a very challenging time.
As we've said the whole way through this, Nick, is unfortunately every situation creates a new opportunity for the fraudsters. And you're quite right, here we are again, and it's around volume, isn't it? And it's the volume of everything we've talked about so far, and volume increases panic, and volume increases opportunity for the fraudsters. They realise that's going on, and therefore they're looking to target it. I actually saw something and posted it on LinkedIn just this week. Monzo Bank, interestingly enough, are actually undertaking some further checks when asking for money to be transferred from our accounts. And I'm hoping the other banks will jump on this too. So Monzo are undertaking a check. If, for instance, I say that I want to transfer X amount of money to Nick Corrie, sort code X, account number Y, they will come back to you to say the details you've provided do not belong to Nick Corrie. Are you still happy this transaction has taken place? The onus, if you like, there's two sides to this. One is what a great initiative. I'm actually giving some comfort to the customer that they might know whether they're making a fraudulent payment or otherwise. The other side of this is the build-up now of the banks passing that responsibility of these transactions back to the consumer, as opposed to that person just expecting the bank to reimburse them regardless. By now telling you that the payment to Nick Corrie isn't necessarily in the account of Nick Corrie, are you still happy for that to be made? What a brilliant thing from me as a bank account holder with Monzo, but actually I now take that responsibility. If it ends up being a fraudulent transaction, I've agreed with the bank that yes, I was happy for that to go ahead. In saying that, I think back to our risk assessment and analysing the risks, I think it's a great initiative by Monzo, and hopefully other banks will follow suit now, and we could begin this process of actually data sharing amongst the banks, if you like, with regards to who owns accounts, to ensure people are making the right payments. And hopefully that will lead, by preventing it, that will lead to a reduction in banking fraud that we all know now.
Well, that's fascinating, Robert. And obviously we know each other from the London Fraud Forum. You're the chairman of the London Fraud Forum. Fantastic event that we've enjoyed attending. Lots and lots of people in a very, very big conference centre. What's the Fraud Forum going to look like this year? Are we going to be online?
I've been chair for the last 5 years. This is a bit different, Nick. I've got to be honest with you. I think we're still in treading water at the moment as to know whether the end of October we can actually physically hold our conference at the Guildhall, for which we've already got lined up the Commissioner of the City of London Police. We already have an ex-MP to speak for us as well, in Mr. Maud, which I'm really looking forward to. And we've got a couple of other people already lined up. As I say, we've got our partners in LexisNexis, we've got other sponsors on board. But you know what? Like everybody at the moment, we've got to have a resilience plan. We have contingencies. And if it isn't in person, it will be online. The Fraud Forum will certainly go ahead regardless.
Well, I look forward to that. I always find it very, very educational, very, very good, but also great networking opportunity as well. And just love, rubbing shoulders with other people that are in the industry, fighting different kinds of fraud. So very, very great.
Hopefully all those opportunities will still be there, Nick. We'll still have rooms whereby people can have breakouts. We still intend to have a networking event so people can still talk to each other. And there is no reason why it won't go ahead, whether it be virtually or whether it be actually in person. And you'll note the new venue, the Guildhall, which I'm really looking forward to. It's as iconic a building as we've held in previously at the Institute of Civil Engineers. So yes, exciting times ahead for London Fraud Forum, but obviously changing times. Webinars were something new, but you know what? I'm really looking forward to that on Thursday as well.
Great stuff. Well, thanks very, very much for talking to us and giving us your thoughts on some of the threats that are out there, large scale and small scale as well. So, Robert, thanks very, very much for talking to us this evening.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you very much all. Stay safe and please be aware in the procurement and fraud world. Just keep your guards up. Thank you very much indeed. Keep going.
Thank you for listening to episode 4 of the Skadi podcast. Stick with us on this journey as we, like many of you, are trying to navigate these very uncertain times. This is the Skadi podcast.